Be nice. I feel slightly intimidated, really, in this lineup in particular. I'm not a CEO. I'm not an MP. I'm not even a celebrity chef. Well, he's not here, is he? I'm a planner. And as a planner, it's natural for me to approach the responsibility question the same way you'd approach the messaging question or the engagement question. What's the relationship between this thing and the effectiveness of ads? Or is it true that good is greedy? That is a theory that a lot of CSR companies would advance. It's a very nice theory for people like me because it would, if true, square the Milton Friedman-esque doctrine of a company exists to build value for its shareholders with the human doctrine of it's nice to be nice. But I've done a bit of digging around, and it isn't true. It isn't quite as true as we'd like it to be, at least. Most modern marketing theory, the Byron Sharp stuff, the Ehrenberg stuff from 2010 to now, says that most work works on the basis of emotional effect and mental availability and memorability, not on likingness and not on a sense of trust. There are probably two exceptions for that, which would be brands that define themselves ethically, talking to consumers that define themselves ethically, which is a small segment of the population. And I think, to Christopher Graham's point about data protection, I think that's probably an exception as well, because that causes actual financial danger, not just a sense of badness. But generally speaking, there doesn't seem to be a very strong relationship between niceness and earning money. And it was interesting when, if you're thinking about shareholder value specifically, VW's emissions scandal, when that broke, there was lots of talk in branding circles, and there was lots of people like me going, it's all about reputation. And indeed, the share price did drop precipitously. However, two things. One, it has bounced back quite healthily. And two, it didn't drop to where it was when they started rigging the tests, which means that, if anything, the public does not punish brands enough for their malfeasance. Which means that it's wrong to simplify responsibility to a profit problem, and it means that my job is a lot harder, but in a lot of ways a lot better, because it means that we must, if we're all here, acknowledge there's a higher and a tougher and a less lucrative reason to think about this stuff. It's more of a people problem. And given that it's a people problem, all that I can talk about really is very personal and about my experiences. And as a person, I think there are two reasons to be concerned with a reputation for irresponsibility. The first one is the obvious one, is the biggie, the question of moral worth. Nobody wants to think of themselves as a bad person. More pointedly, I don't want other people to think of me as a bad person. I got into this mostly so I could tell people that I did it at parties, which doesn't seem to go down that well nowadays. And say that all of us at the coalface were to go on strike. Would the public join us at the picket lines? I guess that comes down to how evil we are. How evil are we? On your voting app. No, they wouldn't give me a poll. They wouldn't give me a poll. However, we can go to the Danteometer. Lifestyle-wise, we're okay. We're lingering in upper hell. We're lustful. We're wrathful. We're hoarders. We're gluttonous. Sorry, Jamie. And that's not so bad. That's not so out of keeping with the rest of the population. But in terms of what we do, potentially we are right down the chthonic bumhole with the panderers and seducers, the flatterers, the hypocrites, the counselors of fraud, which sounds awesome, but probably isn't, because the other half of that question is the question of creative worth. The fact is that we're not just fighting for the freedom to advertise, we're fighting for the freedom to advertise well and interestingly and do good things that make people think. And charismatic salesmanship, which is what this is about, certainly does flatter, seduce, and pander. heightened reality, metaphor, these are forms of fraud. There was not really an old man on the moon. Or if there was, then John Lewis really is in for a trust crisis. And if people don't think that we can be trusted with those tools, we won't be allowed to use them without clarification, mitigation, legals, postscripts, sequences shortened, atoll protected, which I still don't know what that means. I think it's like a Norse god of package holidays. But that incredibly stringent, I'm not saying all these things are wrong, by the way, but they are part of a slope of clarification that ends with unhealthy foods are bad for you if you have one, and expensive things cost money, and an incredibly stringent landscape could be as patronizing as an incredibly misleading one. Why are these two things problems? Strictly speaking, they're not problems unless you want to like what you do. And I do. And I want other people to want to do what I do as well, because I need that. Every piece of advertising is advertising for its client, but it is also advertising the industry of advertising. And in the last 3 years, I've had the experience of having young people come in and work into me and do my things for me, which is brilliant. And what's not brilliant is the sense with every young person I meet of them being incredibly talented and a small epiphany away from realizing they could do something much, much better somewhere else, something with much greater moral worth and much greater creative freedom. I don't know what it must be like to look at the job landscape now, or the landscape of life, and think, if you could be the next Snapchat, if you could be the next YouTube superstar, if you could be the next Disclosure, why the hell would you be the next this? And that question doesn't necessarily go away over time. When you get 5 years down the road and you've done a few campaigns, they've been okay, some have been better than others, some have been more effective than others, and you start to wonder if anything's changing and if you might just be oiling the cogs in the nonsense factory. And then let's say at Christmas, you go home and you find your childhood bedroom, let's say, and you go upstairs and you pull out, I don't know, your copy of Richard Scarry's What Do People Do All Day, and you notice that there is a cat chimney sweep, and there's a dressmaker, and there's an eye doctor, but there is no anthropomorphized wolf marketer. And you start to wonder if you live a real life. Those things, that could happen, maybe. Who knows? But for those reasons, I'm interested in our sense of faith in what we do and how responsibility is tied to that, and how those things are tied to a sense of purpose and self-esteem. And faith isn't really a matter of rules. Nobody is a Christian because they like the sound of the Ten Commandments. Rules have a deceptive air of completeness to them. So if you have a 200-page manual, then anything that is not in the 200-page manual must surely be okay, because the 200-page manual is massive. And therefore, we think that as long as we stick to those guidelines, it'll be fine, whereas beliefs are generative. And beliefs are made to be held, they're made to be communicated and remembered. And it's interesting that advertising might have to take some of its own advice that it gives to its clients and consider that well-imagined brands have something memorable and communicable at their core. And as it happens, we do believe in beliefs. There are lots of beliefs that resound in the advertising catechism and that are still floating around. Things like we sell or else, keep it simple, stupid, pay, don't earn, single-minded propositions, salesmanship in print, and actually trust might also be one of those beliefs. The interesting thing about looking around these is they mostly describe how the work works, not how the worker works, not how we should work, what we should do, how we should do it, what we're there for. And the superstar example of such a document is, of course, the Hippocratic Oath, which has been around for a couple of thousand years. It's gone through one major revision about 40 years ago, but it's still very, very similar. And it's interesting because it has stuff that we could directly lift. I will respect the privacy of my patients. It has certain moral admonishments, but it also has a description of the benefits of following a code. So not just don't break these rules or we'll fine you 20 million euros, but if you hold these rules in trust and if you believe in them and if you think they're important, May I enjoy life and art, respect it while I live, and remember with affection thereafter. May I always act so as to preserve the finest traditions of my calling. It's got a sense of brotherhood and comradeship that I think perhaps is part of the draw for why we're not here to download the latest rules. We're here because we have a shared drive to do something right, and it's good to come to something like this and see lots of people at different levels and go, right, I'm not alone in feeling this way. I think we could benefit from some similar covenant. What would you say in an advertising oath? With the time that I have and the need to make the tortured Dante joke, I don't have enough latitude to come to a specific answer. But for what it's worth, I do have a few beliefs around how we sell and also what we sell, who we're working for. The how is interesting because we're kind of halfway there. The principles of honest, decent, and legal have been repeated and remembered for some years now, and maybe that's good testament as to why a nice tricolon sticks in your head. But I do believe that they can be used as a blunt instrument if taken out of context. If I've seen good work get threatened by just applying these rules without really testing them. And I think the main example of that would be the favourite thing that I've ever done, though it may not be your favourite thing, apparently, which was the Green Party boy band ad, which by some standards is potentially indecent. It conflates issues that are quite disparate. It simplifies certain things, though no one in politics ever does that. And at times, it was slightly personal. And there were two groups of people that labelled it childish. There were people that hated the Green Party, and there were also people that liked the Green Party a lot because they felt it was childish. But what kept us on course and what allowed us to make it and know that we were doing the right thing, which was confirmed by the data, was those people were not the people that it was for. The context was that we were speaking to people in the middle that felt that politics had abandoned them and that it was homogenous and that it wasn't speaking to them. We were trying to offer them a way through and a way to re-engage with a system that they felt wasn't for them. I think that the how we sell and the questions of decency are always audience contextual. So I think, as was just said, I think we sell best when we remember that we sell to a person. So my personal commitment would be to know the audience as well as I can, to respect their sensitivities as much as is possible, and this is what makes good work, to tell them such a truth about their lives that they can't help but remember it and honour them as people beyond their value to my client. The what we sell is trickier because, one, it does involve in some senses a fiscal sacrifice, and two, because it is totally subjective. One, Silicon Valley entrepreneur's disruption is a unemployed taxi driver's disruption. Under the guise of the sharing economy, things like Uber and Deliveroo are either creating an incredibly flexible, sustainable new marketplace or a bottomless monopoly where we're all going to sell ourselves to the lowest bidder in the end. And I still use these things. It's all totally subjective, but for what it's worth, I can offer two thoughts about the way that I think through these questions. The first one, back to the coalface, there's a question about what is all advertising for. The earth is of a finite mass, and ultimately, all material capitalism involves digging holes in that earth and then moving around the things that you've dug up and changing their shape. Advertising is a very strange beast in that equation because it can ascribe value to something that is of a limited mass. We can make people value small rocks instead of big ones and maybe just save the planet. The government can tell people that they should eat healthily, but we can make that desirable. In a carrot and stick model, advertising can be the carrot and make the carrot tasty and possibly make that metaphor work for the first time in its life. And when we think of advertising as a creative industry, maybe we should take that word with a little bit more weight. And the second thing is that responsibility is basically a fancy word for ownership. And it's interesting, if you look into the details of the Credos report, it says that it's clients that are worried most about responsibility, then agencies, then media. And I wonder if that is a ownership question. If, as we get further and further away from the capitalistic act, from the act of creation, we allow ourselves to abandon that thing and go, well, so I can say, I don't make the thing, I just make the ad. And a media owner can say, I don't make the ads, I just own the media. And the person that runs the banner network can go, well, I don't own the media, I just distribute that to those things, and it's not me. And in James's example of the defense client, that is an example of a supply chain that is a chain. They were told by people further down the chain, actually, we've looked at this closely, and it doesn't work. Or Angela's example of the banking crisis. That is an example of a weak supply chain where some people further down that were handling the money were not talking to the people that took the money. This is my understanding of it anyway. I don't know. Either way, I can't get a mortgage. And those things broke down. So maybe as an industry, we need to look at our supply chains as carefully as our clients look at theirs and realize that we're part of it. Ultimately, this is all about owning the thing. So what do we sell? We sell the things that we'd be okay to make. Again, this is standard planning in some ways, but it's my commitment, I hope, to understand the things that I sell, their method of manufacture, their profit margin, their relative features and benefits. Where they fall short, using my insider status to try and make them better and go, this product is not good enough. If I can't make it better, finding someone better to work with instead, but ultimately selling something as though I made it or not selling it at all. Now, do I do these things? Of course I do not do these things all the time flawlessly. I don't think anybody does. I think all talk of principle is subject to 1,000 tiny compromises in the name of food on the table and a reasonable rent in Zone 2. I said at the start, these things are really troubling to me. But maybe the fact that they are troubling is kind of half the answer. So in the report, it says that one in 3 of us sometimes feel that we must apologize for working in the industry. Now, in classic planning statistics twisting, that also means that 1 in 3 of us have a conscience, at least 1 in 3 of us. 1 in 3 of us are able to feel that we could do better, and 1 in 3 of us want it to change. And maybe if we find the right set of beliefs, the right oath to articulate how we want to change and where we want to get to, then by Lead 2017, we could be in paradise, or at least purgatory. Thanks.